Okay, Oscar nuts, stop complaining that this is a boring Oscar year. All hell done just broke loose. This is just a day after BAFTA, 2 days after DGA, and suddenly everything's a mess. Where it looked like it was all boring last week on Saturday, suddenly Birdman wins DGA, and you think, hey, now it's all lined up with the Actors Guild and with the Producers Guild, so therefore Birdman's going to go all the way. And then, of course, we went to BAFTA, and that screwed up everything, didn't it, Paul Sheehan? Suddenly, Boyhood was back out front. What's going on?
Well, not so much out front, but I think it rallied. I mean, once, and Daniel wrote a great piece about when you sweep those three guilds, PGA, DGA, and SAG, you should win Best Picture. And I think there's only one film that didn't. I'll let him tell you what that was. But so we're thinking, well, then Birdman's in. But now we've got this new wrinkle of BAFTAs moved up in 2000 to be part of the Oscar calendar, and they've gotten the last 6 Best Pictures right. So they've got Boyhood. Now, was it that their voting finished before the DGA announcement, and had they known about Birdman winning there, might they have shifted? Because Birdman had 10 nominations at BAFTA and only won a single award, cinematography, and Boyhood had 5 and got 3, picture, director, and then supporting actress. So it needed those wins, and I think the little gem, Grand Budapest Hotel, it won 5 BAFTAs out of its leading 11 nominations. I keep saying this is a film we're underestimating at the Oscars, especially with the preferential ballot. Now, I know all of you are going to tell me how wrong I am. So, Chris, Daniel, any of you
Right. Well, let me set this up before getting to. Let's go to Daniel next. But before, let me set that up. What Paul's saying here is, suddenly, should we consider an upset by Budapest for Best Picture if it's everybody's #2 vote, given all the strength that it suddenly came in second place, of course, at BAFTA? It's a very interesting idea. But Daniel, let's go back to some of these other stats. All right, Paul's right. Last 6 Best Pictures in a row out of BAFTA won Best Picture. But last 7 out of PGA won, right? So go give us your theory about when PGA, DGA, and SAG line up, because they all just line up for Birdman. Doesn't that mean it's a slam dunk, or no?
It should be. I'm not as confident as I normally would be. Having swept PGA, DGA, and SAG, I would have thought it would have gotten BAFTA too. But even without BAFTA, you have to go back 20 years to Apollo 13 to find the last time any film won those 3, the sort of the trifecta of big industry awards, the Producers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, and the Directors Guild. Won all 3 of those and then didn't win the Best Picture Oscar. That's the only time that has ever happened, and that was, I think, the first year that SAG was even giving awards. So, it's mathematically difficult to look back at that statistic and see Birdman losing, but at the same time, BAFTA giving it to Boyhood does mean it's a possibility. I mean, what BAFTA guaranteed by picking Boyhood is that someone is going to have their winning streak end. Either PGA is going to be wrong for the first time in 7-8 years, or BAFTA is going to be wrong for the first time in almost that many years. So, whatever happens at the Oscars, it's going to break someone's prediction streak. It's going to go against some statistic that we usually look at as a reliable predictor.
Now, our friend Chris Beecham here is the King Solomon of Gold Derby. He likes to split the baby, and he told me this morning that he's going to split his Best Picture and Director and solve this whole thing that way, right, Chris?
I am. I couldn't hardly sleep last night. This weekend just threw me for a loop, and I told somebody yesterday, if you told me for sure it was going to be a split, I would have said that Boyhood would have won DGA and Birdman was going to win BAFTA. I mean, it was just totally opposite of what I expected. But I'm going with Birdman for directing at the Oscars, and I'm going for Boyhood at for Best Picture at the Oscars. But I could be totally convinced if somebody here is convincing enough to change.
Well, last year at BAFTA, Alfonso Cuarón won for directing, but of course Gravity had won Best British Film over there, while 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture. So they split, if you just count it, because Gravity was also up for Best Picture and lost to Slave. So they split the vote, but they didn't do it this time. They gave both Boyhood and Linklater their awards. So if it was going to split at the Oscars, we had some foreshadowing of that at BAFTA. But we didn't have it this time, Chris. So why does that make sense?
I looked back. I've looked at all the things you've all mentioned, the 6 years, 7 years, all the different groups. The thing I noticed about DGA when I looked at it this morning, the last 13 years, going back to Crouching Tiger's year, every year since then, the DGA winner has either won himself or herself at the Oscars, or their picture has won Best Picture every single one of those years. Even like last year, you had Alfonso win directing, but 12 Years won, Best Picture. The year before, it was just the opposite. Ben Affleck won at DGA, but Argo did win Best Picture at the Oscars. So it seems like DGA might have their finger on the pulse of, in my opinion, just looking at that, Birdman's either going to win both at the Oscars, or it's at least going to win for directing.
But Paul, you're our master of this stat. Normally, picture and director line up at the Oscars, even though we could point to the past 2 years where they did, right?
Yeah, absolutely, but that's usually because they have gone hand in hand. The director, the DGA winner for Best Director ends up winning at the Oscars, and usually the best directed film is the Best Picture. And I know I go on, and I made the assumption that everyone's already been bored hearing me talk about the preferential ballot, so I didn't go into great detail about it. I do think this is a new universe, though, since they introduced the preferential ballot, just in terms of what wins Best Picture, and I think that's why, I think can we agree that if Affleck had been nominated by the directors branch of the Academy, would he have won? Do you think that year?
Yes,
would he have won
I definitely
Best
think
Director?
he would have won.
Yeah. So I mean, last year everyone was talking about Gravity being this great directorial achievement, and I wonder if this year, I think I mentioned this to you, Tom, that Birdman resonates. Yes, it resonates with directors. It obviously resonates with actors. It's about actors. Even Keaton's playing a would-be producer in it. That resonates with the PGA. But again, going back to Grand Budapest, what about the crafts? They've given it lots of nominations. Are they going to give it any wins? Birdman. When I was doing the update on our experts' predictions this morning, and I looked to see how many Oscars is Birdman predicted to win, because right now we've got 11 of our 21 experts saying Birdman, 10 are saying Boyhood, so it wins there. We've got it winning director, but the only other thing we've got it winning is cinematography, which it won at BAFTA, the only one it won. I mean, are we going to see a Best Picture winner that has only 3 Oscars? I mean, does that how does that sit with you? 3, one to each, an Oscar for each of you if you were at Birdman.
It's happened before, right? Didn't Crash just win 3?
12 Years a Slave won 3.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm just putting it out there.
But I think Birdman will win more. I think we're underestimating the number. When I switched to Birdman for picture and director, after DGA on Saturday night, I sort of went back in my predictions and said, okay, well, if it's the best picture, what else are they going to give it? And I noticed that I have it in only 2 other categories at the moment, cinematography, and I actually have it for screenplay. I think if it's going to win best picture, a film like this will probably take the screenplay race too, although that's not guaranteed. But I can see them giving it something else in maybe even sound mixing, like went to Slumdog Millionaire when they were giving that film everything. I don't necessarily think it's gonna stop there, but yeah, I can see it winning just maybe 4 or 5. Best actor, Michael Keaton we'll probably talk about later. That's again a possibility. So I'm not sure it just stops it.
Now. You didn't change your. Where do you stand now in the Best Actor race, Daniel?
That's harder now than it was after SAG. Even though Eddie Redmayne, was consistent, he won BAFTA after having just won SAG. The fact that Birdman won the 3 guilds, PGA, DGA, and SAG, and it looks like the strong Best Picture favorite, it would be hard to imagine. I mean, it's possible. There have been films that have won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, not won for acting. Some weren't even nominated. for that star performance not to go along for the ride would seem kind of unusual. I mean, I think back to Jean Dujardin for The Artist winning, Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men in the supporting category. You have these films, they're strong enough to win, for a lead performance like that. It's definitely in the running. It might just go along for the ride, but I'm still going with the SAG reliability and sort of for the moment going with Eddie Redmayne. But I'm wavering on that even more than I am on say Best Picture and Director at this point.
Well, 17 out of the past 20 winners of SAG for Best Actor went on to win at the Oscars, but you're right, there's this mysterious link between picture and actor that one of the acting slots, they usually like to give it to that. Paul and Chris, where do you stand on all this?
Well, I think if Keaton was going to win the Oscar, you mentioned the most important stat. I think he's playing an actor. Wouldn't SAG give him their award? I mean, that baffles me. If he ultimately goes on to win the Oscar, I'm just going to look back and go, that just totally baffles me, because you would have thought he would have won at SAG. And then the BAFTA win for Redmayne, I thought was, very much on point and very logical. But
he plays a Brit, and he is a Brit, and it's the British awards. You could almost kind of excuse that way, right?
Yeah, what I think is interesting, and we'll never know. I mean, it could have been down to just a handful of votes that Eddie Redmayne won by at SAG. It's interesting though with our experts. They're pouring in and updating, and certainly a lot of them switched. On Friday, Birdman only had 5 experts. Now it's got 11, but nobody was switching away from Redmayne to Keaton. It's still Redmayne 12, Keaton 9. So it's not like our experts are saying, oh yes, I think that Keaton will get a boost here, and I think that that's telling.
It's a close race. I'm not totally 100% convinced Redmayne's going to win, but I think if you just tick off all those boxes of typical Oscar kind of winning performances, I mean, true story, real life person, affliction, battling all odds. I mean, it's very impressive.
Now it's interesting because the Oscars are 2 weeks yesterday, but voting, that's the 22nd. Voting ends on the 17th. So, I mean, it started last Friday. It goes till the 17th. I think there's usually a few people will vote as soon as they get their ballot. So they might have voted before DGA and BAFTA. And then I think there's just a smattering, and then there's another clump that vote right at the end. And I think electronic voting has allowed people to extend it right till the end, till the afternoon of the 17th. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what does Redmayne do this coming week. What does Keaton do this coming week? Or either of them on television talking to anyone, any late night show host. I guess, Keaton's just that interview he gave with Brian Williams, that turned out to be a mistake. But or no, sorry, I take it back. Brian Williams said that he interviewed Michael Keaton. We never saw it, but he did. Wow. He said he interviewed him.
Well, Eddie's back over in Britain now, I know. They both did the late night circuit round, I think, the week before or so. I haven't checked who's on the talk shows this week with Keaton's group.
Yeah, so it's pretty a lot of sharp elbows out there, I bet you. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of whispers and things, and of course we've talked about this before, Tom. But this, what they call phase 2, they're very restricted as to what they can do, aren't they, in terms of just reaching out to Academy members.
Right, they're not allowed to feed them in round 2. This is hilarious. Somebody actually sat down and thought about this at the Academy, right? They said, all right, you can have a screening, you can have a little event, but you can't feed them. You can't get them drunk. Only on phase 1 can you do that, have food and drink. Now, what is that all about? Who knows? I can't think there's any logic to it at all. But it does kind of summon up visions of the old days, the great glory days of award campaigning when the HFPA won a sweep of awards for Anne of 1,000 Days because they had fed mignon to the HFPA, right before the voting.
Well, one
Yeah,
big event, this coming weekend is Writers Guild, and I think Keaton is a little disadvantage there in that Redmayne probably I would think would be there. Theory is up, but Birdman was not eligible, so there's no real reason for Keaton to be there unless he's coming as some sort of presenter.
Yeah, there's a sort of a super Saturday of lots of I think Sunday as well. Check our homepage. There's a lot of those other guilds are giving out their awards in this coming weekend.
And
so
those aren't on TV, but I mean, it's a chance to meet, Academy voters. It's a chance to shake hands and kiss babies and do all that sort of stuff. So, any opportunity like that at this point in a close race, you just don't know.
We don't know anything this year. It's suddenly very exciting. This is really, really a great year, isn't it? All of a sudden now, for the next few weeks, wow.
Because I mentioned something though that Paul mentioned back a while ago, and I thought I was going to be crazy to bring this up, so I'm glad Paul mentioned it. But with that preferential on Best Picture, if you're just a fanatic Boyhood fan, wouldn't you potentially mark Birdman toward the bottom, 7 or 8, and vice versa with a Birdman fan with Boyhood? So a Grand Budapest, if it's second, third on a lot of ballots this year, that's possible.
It does seem like a nice alternative for everyone. I mean, who doesn't like it, if not love it, Grand Budapest? I mean, it's charming. It seems like if you like Boyhood, it's got a heart, you'd put Grand Budapest. If you like Birdman for its directorial achievement, you'd put Grand Budapest to honor Wes Anderson, the writer-director. I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes. And it's got.
I feel like it's going to be your most awarded film that night at the Oscars.
Yeah, because it's got its depth and breadth of support. I mean, it's got the most nominations, lots of different branches. So it's a real breakthrough for Wes Anderson. In terms of the Oscars. It's interesting because it's. I mean, you wonder about the Oscar IOU and back to maybe the split that Chris was talking about, because Inarritu with Babel, which was just a really wonderful picture, and I think a lot of people really look back on that one fondly. It's sort of like, oh well, do they give him Best Director now for this? And still go with Boyhood.
Right. Babel won, I remember, the Golden Globe for Best Drama Film the year of The Departed, and then suddenly there was this surge for Scorsese at the Oscars, of course. But Babel was a masterpiece, yeah. Paul and I, we were talking about this, I think, last night, Paul. Let's bring this up, that things are kind of flip-flopped this year from what we might expect, because the year of The King's Speech versus The Social Network, which is suddenly the parallel that we're all looking at here. In other words, one movie sweeps the early awards, and then suddenly when you get to the guilds, everything changes. And that, in this case, of course, would be Boyhood winning those precursors, and then suddenly Birdman taking over. But Boyhood is the emotional movie, just like King's Speech was. So you would expect that to have explained what happened 4 years ago to, oh, well, those Hollywood people just got very schmaltzy and they fell in love with the sentimental film. But the opposite is true here. The sentimental film is the one that's suddenly losing, right, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then
at least on the guild side, until BAFTA, right?
But I'm mindful of what I remember I gave Chris a little bit of a hard time when he was saying that he didn't know if the British voters would embrace Boyhood. He thought it was maybe just too Americana. And I was arguing it had this universal theme. And of course we do, don't forget the Academy has a worldwide membership. I mean, it's got a few hundred in England. It's got people all over Europe and around the world. And so I don't know if I think Boyhood travels better than Birdman in a way. I mean, Birdman feels very insular, very inside. So
what's your prediction for Best Picture right now, Paul?
Oh, I'm one of those 11 that said Birdman, but I could.
Okay. Me too. I switched.
And you're one of those 11 that said Birdman. So
yes, and that with great confidence.
About this is we're all giving the pros and cons of all of these major contenders. We're talking ourselves out of these things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, let me say something else about BAFTA. That year that we all refer to that seems similar to this one, with Social Network early on and then King's Speech taking over at the guilds. Keep in mind, of course, it was a British film, but that King's Speech went on to win at BAFTA too, which we don't have that situation here with Birdman doing the guilds and then Boyhood winning BAFTA. But I would say if you're just trying to find that one little thing that might be the key in picking which one of these is going to win Best Picture, I would say the BAFTA vote going for Boyhood is very important here. It's like a mini version of the Academy because you would have had all of the different branch members picking Boyhood as Best Picture.
Yeah,
True,
yeah. Now they go and that's a straight ballot at BAFTA. It's just and they only had 5 nominees. They don't have the 8 at the Oscars, but it was just checking one of them. And we think, are there 300, 400, 500 members of both? A lot of them probably actors, but people in all those different branches. So you're right, Chris. The fact
but to me, it would be more. I would think if we just can't decide, and you're just trying to find one little thing, that group of BAFTA voters would be more in line with, say, a PGA, which you all reminded me late last week is tons and tons of TV directors as well. I mean, TV producers as well. And DGA was tons and tons. In other words, the makeup of those guilds is not necessarily the same as the Academy or BAFTA.
Well, and that's right. Like, for instance, with DGA, it's a few hundred at the Oscars, and it's almost 15,000 at the DGA. And where you see that difference is at the nomination level. Like the Ben Affleck not getting nominated at the Oscars, and of course Ron Howard not being nominated for directing Apollo 13, which I guess that might have been the fatal blow for Apollo 13 that year. I mean, Mel Gibson wins directing and for Braveheart, which goes on to take Best Picture. So again, the fact that they're at least that Linklater and Inarritu are both in it at the Oscars doesn't help us.
Well, one other thing about BAFTA, the last few years, I have used them as my bellwether if there was a really tough category. If it was like everybody else was disagreeing, I know I've mentioned this on a couple of chats, but 2 years ago when Brave and Wreck-It Ralph were just swapping awards at every show, I just told myself on that Saturday, that Sunday, whichever of the two BAFTA chooses, that's what I'm going to choose. And I did the same thing 2 years ago with Christoph Waltz. I did the same with Marion Cotillard and Tilda Swinton. Even last year, with 12 Years in Gravity, I just said I'm going to pick whatever BAFTA picks. So it's paid off for me in those kinds of categories.
Oh, and just one other thing, and I've mentioned this before, but we learned last year that unfortunately some Oscar voters will vote without having seen these films, just because they want to be on the winning team. So, I mean, if that narrative of, BAFTA aside, that Birdman's the winner, getting that triple crown of the 3 guilds, people could vote for it without having watched it. That's a real possibility that it becomes. It's presumed to win, therefore it does win.
Right. That there's a new bandwagon. Final thoughts here, Daniel. So what are you predicting right now and why for Best Picture?
I'm predicting Birdman for picture and director. I'm for the moment I'm sticking with DGA, PGA, and SAG. That's a tough combo to beat. And I'll just say we're talking about Boyhood being sort of the sentimental film. I think just in comparison it's more sentimental maybe than Birdman. But I think Birdman is kind of a sentimental film if you consider the way it appeals to Hollywood. This is a film about an actor who says, screw the critics, screw, he's going to throw caution to the wind and make the great piece of art of his life. And it's ultimately, I think, very sympathetic to that character, even though it is a little bit snarky and cynical in places. So I think, I think we shouldn't necessarily think, okay, is the cynical film going to beat the heart-tugging film? Because I think Birdman is going to tug the hearts of some creative people.
All right, let's wrap it up here. We will pick this up in a few more days when we all change our mind in our votes. But for now, we think we know what's ahead, but we don't really. Of course, we're giving the best performance by pundits who were totally confused by this Derby. Where do you stand? You go to our prediction center, give us your votes, and we'll report them at Gold Derby.
And they'll be reflected in our odds.
That's right. They'll be reflected in our odds.